Special joint hearing on Senate Education and the Senate Select Committee on California's Education Race to the Top Committee. We are looking forward. This is an informational hearing, so we don't need to go through roll call or anything like that. Let it be noted that the chair and the vice chair are here, and I know another members have indicated that they will be stopping in shortly as well. But let's go ahead and begin, and I think today really is a testament to the indomitable spirit of education reform, that there will be no stopping us in moving us forward in fighting for the education opportunities for every child in California's public school system. We know that California very honorably and proudly accepted the challenge from President Barack Obama as he challenged every state in the nation to race to the top, to make the policy changes that were necessary in order to become more competitive and to enhance and advance the educational outcomes of California's children. We did, of course, submit a competitive application in round one. Unfortunately, as we know, we were declined in that. And we will hear today for some of the reasons for that failure to make it into the first round of funding. But as a state, we do congratulate those who were accepted. But this is round two. The race has become a marathon, and we are not going to quit. We are going to do everything in our power to ensure that California is recognized as a national leader on the fight for education reform. The good thing is that the policy that we implemented in round one stays in place. And we have always said as a state that Race to the Top has never been just about the money. It is about the fundamental reforms that have been needed in order to bring about the reforms that we need in public education. So the reforms, the policy stays in place. Round two, and we'll hear from witnesses, but I do not believe that we have to do any particular legislative changes to qualify for round two, but we will hear from the witnesses today. So having said that, I want to thank the Secretary of Education. I want to thank the Superintendent of Public Instruction. I want to thank the Governor of the State of California and this legislature for committing ourselves to saying that California will not be pushed out of the race. We will continue to move and go forward, and I think that this proposal for round two, which is very innovative and directly involves the participation of 6 very forward-thinking districts in California as lead authors, the initiators for round two, with the opening up to every other district that's willing to sign on as well, I think is a very creative approach. So let me just thank everybody once again for the hard work. I know that June 1 is looming very close. We appreciate taking your time today to come and update the Senate Education Committee on where we are today and how far we need to go to really move us to the head of the class once again. Let me stop there and turn it over to the Vice Chair of the committee, Senator Huff, for your opening comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, it was an interesting process getting to this point where we can look back and see what we need to do now, because we did take some heat in trying to implement the changes that led to Race to the Top application. I know I took heat from my own party. How could I agree with President Obama? Said, you know what? Even a stop clock is right twice a day, but when you find somebody doing something the right thing, you've got to go with it. And I think that we did implement some good reforms, and we took heat from all sides, which says that it was, usually that's a good indicator that you're somewhere in the right place when everybody's finding fault with you somewhere. But I do believe that those reforms will help the kids, and that's ultimately what this is all about. And to that degree, I also am proud of what we accomplished first time around. It's sad that we didn't have more schools and labor behind us, and hopefully we can get that down the road, because goodness knows we're going to find out by Friday that there's not as much money in the state as we would all like to have. We know that already, but we're going to have it in cold, hard facts. And to that degree, when there is federal money available to help backfill the state's attempts to fund education, I think we should do what we can to do that without violating any core values. But I think so far we have been doing good things along the line of actually reforms that should have been done a long time ago, and I'm pleased to be a part of this and look forward to hearing what we can do to be competitive this time around. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Huff. All right, let's go ahead and begin then with our first panel. And this is basically what we learned from round one of Race to the Top. Joining us will be the representatives from the Legislative Analyst's Office, Jim Soland and also Jennifer Kuhn. And we welcome you to the table. We look forward to your presentation. If you can go ahead and give us a little bit of an autopsy, in a sense, sort of what we did, what happened, so that we can understand what we need to do to get ready to, to keep going forward. So let's go ahead. Welcome, Mr. Soland, for being here today. We look forward to your testimony.
Thanks. Good morning, Jim Soland, Legislative Analyst's Office. So, as you mentioned, I'm going to be providing just a brief overview of Phase 1 Race to the Top work in California and its implications for a potential Phase 2 application. Talk a little bit about the background, the results specific to how we did stacked up against other states, and then talk about some of the specifics of our scoring, our specific application. And pose some questions for the Phase 2 application going forward. At this point, you should have a handout up there. And turning to page 1, as you know and have already mentioned, the Race to the Top competition was part of the federal stimulus package that the federal government passed last year. It's a $4 billion state competition focused around the 4 major reform areas, including standards and assessment, student achievement data, improving teacher and school leader effectiveness, and improving low-achieving schools. Now, the competition, as everyone knows, has 2 phases. We've already heard about the outcome of Phase 1, and as has already been indicated, Phase 2, the deadline is rapidly approaching. In addition to the June 1st deadline, we'll essentially know who the front runners are for Phase 2 by July 26, when states are invited to Washington, D.C. to interview if they're selected for that next phase.
So we should start marking our calendars now, right? July 26. We are very optimistic and we are determined.
Excellent. So moving on to page 2, as I don't need to tell the committee, there were several bills passed in order to support the competitiveness of our application. And I'll just touch on a couple things quickly to help provide context for Phase 2. There are a couple of big items that will have implications going forward. Virtually all of them will have some implication going forward, but some of the considerations that might still figure into Phase 2 would most certainly be the creation of an Academic Standards Commission and the deadline of August 2nd for that commission and the State Board to consider the role that common standards might play for the state. In addition, some of the teacher proposals along the lines of alternative pathways and some of the policies related to low-achieving schools will almost certainly figure into how the federal government views California's Phase 2 Race to the Top application. So all of those bear some consideration as you think about the broader context of what we're trying to achieve as a state and how the Phase 2 application will facilitate these goals. Moving on to page 3, after the legislation was passed, we submitted the paper application to the federal government, which included the narrative for the state's Race to the Top proposal. In Phase 1, the state asked for $1 billion and would have funded projects in all 4 major reform areas. There were a lot of different proposals, but the costliest projects focused on bolstering regional support for a number of activities, including regional support systems for low-performing schools, science, technology, engineering, math training, and just basic county Office of Education support for Race to the Top grant recipients. And it's important to consider, too, the regional nature of the original application, in part because given that this new phase will potentially be driven by districts, it's not clear whether or not some of these policies will be part of the next round application, what kind of support will be provided to participating districts, and several questions along those lines. And just a quick note here, too, as far as the budget goes. In the original Phase 1 competition, there were grant ranges proposed for states. California's was $300 million to $750 million. We asked for $1 billion. The federal government has made it clear, though, that in Phase 2, those are hard and fast ranges, so the state would not be able to submit an application for more than the $700 million maximum. Moving on to page 4, and just looking at California's Phase 1 application versus what other states were able to do. As you've mentioned, the application was unfortunately unsuccessful, finished 27th out of the 41 states that applied. And as I've mentioned before, there is this sort of next round interview phase that comes after you've submitted the paper application. In Phase 1, there were 15 states plus the District of Columbia that were invited into that next phase. And ultimately, the 2 states, Delaware and Tennessee, were winners. Just thinking about the total race to the top.
Excuse me, though. I'm going to intersect and to say that I think every state that answered the challenge and entered an application were winners. It's just that only 2 walked away with the money.
Yes.
I think we were all winners.
Yes.
And we'll be even more grand winners in the round 2.
Yes. Grant recipient would have been a much better choice of words, so my apologies. So just an important note on what this means for the budget going forward. It was obviously a $4 billion competition nationwide, and with Delaware receiving $100 million and Tennessee receiving $500 million, that leaves about $3.4 billion for Phase 2 among all states that are in the competition. So in addition to some of the high participation rates, which the table on this page lays out, many of the states were pretty aggressive in terms of both their data systems, the development of them, and the way they're being used in decisions about teacher evaluation and even some personnel decisions. Just a couple of things to highlight in the actual table. As you can see, Delaware and Tennessee had extremely high participation rates, both in terms of the percentage of the districts and the percentage of the students. One takeaway here is that California was certainly within the bandwidth of all of these applicants. We, as you can see, are not bottom on this list in terms of participation. And in fact, Georgia, which is at the bottom of this list, was the 3rd place finisher in the first round grant competition. So making sense of all of this can be a little tricky. But the ultimate takeaway is that California wasn't entirely beyond the spectrum. Moving on to page 5. And looking a little bit specifically at California's Phase 1 race to the top score, the state lost points in several areas, but the biggest deductions related to district participation, evaluation of teachers, data systems, and science, technology, engineering, and math focus. As you'll see on the list, in the table that we've provided, securing local education agency commitment was top of the list in terms of the points that we lost.
And can you elaborate on that? When you say securing district participation, meaning specifically?
So it's a number of items. One would be the degree to which a district is committed to the reform efforts that are being proposed, as evidenced by the memorandum of understanding that they would sign. And then it's also a matter just of this sort of scope of the participation. How many districts are there, and what percentage of the statewide total do they represent?
So just to be very clear, essentially we talk about securing local education agency commitment. In other words, it was very low. We got a low participation rate. I just want to be very clear.
We did, absolutely. That was one of the lowest points in the first round application. And it's also a question that should be asked going forward, which is, given that a component of this is total percentage of districts as a percentage of statewide total, what would that mean in the event that we're applying with just a smaller handful of districts?
And on the getting the commitment from the districts to participate, there were 45 available points in this section of the overall score, and we lost 22 points. We only earned 23 points. So that was almost, like 50%. Basically, we lost 50% because we basically had, only 50% of the districts that said we're going to step forward and sign on and make the commitment and participate.
Yes, that's exactly right.
All
and
right.
Definitely the largest source of lost points in the application.
So it'll be interesting now when the administration steps forward to hear, and I think this is why I think it's a very innovative route to go ahead and say, let's start with the leads, 6 districts that have made the commitment, move forward. So it will be interesting to hear that perspective as they step forward, and also the questioning at this point as to whether or not the new scoring formula will accept that we do not have to have, hopefully we would have 100%. Like 100% of districts saying, yes, we step forward to help our children race to the top. But that's for the next panel. I'm just sort of peppering them ahead of time so they can start thinking about their answers.
Well, and that's exactly right. One question that I think we touch on the next page is just in terms of what the Phase 2 application might look like. Will we be judged in terms of the percentage of districts participating as a percentage of the whole statewide, or would it be to say we have a consortia of 6 districts, we're getting 100% participation among those districts?
And one other question on this area. We didn't get the commitment. We lost almost half of our points. Can you elaborate for the committee reasons why the districts said, we're not going to play ball?
I wouldn't want to speak too much specifically to, what exactly districts were deciding and why they decided, but I think there were a number of factors. Part of it would probably be that there were a lot of pretty wide sweeping reforms, and so there were major implementation questions to be asked at the local level. And I think part of it too is that there are a bunch of different ways that commitment is operationalized, one of them being union support. And so in some cases it would have been tougher to bring the unions into agreement on some of these items. But there's a wide range of factors. It was a major commitment on the part of LEAs, and certainly a lot of factors to weigh.
If I might, Jennifer Kuhn from the Ledge Analyst, just interject since we're on this table. In addition to the participation rate, as Jim mentioned, there are a couple areas of other weaknesses in California's application. And just as the chair noted with securing local commitment, the state losing almost half of the available points, there were others where the state actually lost even more of the available points. So for example, for STEM, California didn't get any of the available 15 points. For data, implementing a statewide data system, California got only 6 of the 24 available points, and using data to improve instruction, only 8 of 18. And the third category that Jim mentioned where the state was particularly weak was using evals to inform personnel decisions, again, almost losing half, 15 of the 28 available points. So there were a number of areas of notable weakness in California's application.
Sure.
On the data, obviously we came to the table late in implementing some data systems, but I see that the states that got more money have already made progress toward developing P20 data systems and using them to make personnel decisions. Is there something we can do in the meantime to beef that up? Adopting something and implementing it are two different things, but what can we do to be more competitive in that area?
I think the state has taken one step in that it also applied within the last several months, actually way back in December, for an Institute of Education Sciences grant, but it's a federal grant to support education data systems. So that was a step in the right direction. California hasn't been as strategic as other states in ensuring its CalPADS, its longitudinal student data system, is sort of on time, on budget, producing the results that are intended, and expanding the capacity as other states have expanded it to ensure that high school data is feeding into to providing information to colleges, for example, to reduce remediation rates, expedite the college experience, ensure kids are ready for college. Also on the other end of ensuring preschoolers are ready for kindergarten. So the state could just, I think, be a little bit more strategic about ensuring that these statewide ed data projects are proceeding and expanding and then being used. And so also the state and the local level efforts could be better coordinated. If the state now has the capacity to collect career readiness data, for example, that the field has some money and incentive to be using the data to inform their instruction so that the whole system ends up better. Several other states are far more sophisticated at both the state and the local level about having capacity to collect data and then having capacity locally to use it, analyze it, inform professional development from it.
And let me just stop for a moment to note that 2 other members of the Education Committee have joined us, and each of us made some opening comments. I don't know if you care to make some comments or if you have questions at this time. Senators Carol Liu, who also is the chair of the Budget Subcommittee on Education Finance, and Senator Lonnie Hancock. So thank you for joining us. If you care to make comments or ask questions at this time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just was curious. On page 5, again, going back to securing local education agencies' commitment, and you talked about Georgia being third in line, even though they have, I think, worse numbers than we do. How did that happen?
I don't have a lot of specific detail on their application, except to say that my understanding is that by virtue of some of the work that they've done in other areas, they didn't end up losing quite as many points in other areas, so that helped bring
their application.
It did. Why they were able to overcome such a low participation rate, I don't have a detailed answer for you, but I'd be happy to provide one.
I just was curious. And the other thing, following up with Senator Huff, we've been in this discussion about data collection for a number of years, and what is going on that we can't get off the dime? What is hindering our ability to do a more effective job? Is it just because we're so huge and there's just too many people in the pie, or what's what is going on? I don't understand. How it's not working, because it's really necessary in order for us to move forward with our students.
This is speculation. We as the legislature at large does monitor CalPADS and tries to figure out is it on time, but it hasn't been on time, it hasn't been on budget, it hasn't been producing the objectives that were intended. It's been taking much longer for these things to happen. So although some of it might be management, some of it very likely is the size and complexity of the California system. We have 1,000 districts, so it's a very decentralized system. And we don't have a centralized state system, so even when the department is working with the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, or UC, CSU, the Chancellor's Office, it's just not centralized. And then even when you try to coordinate community college information with district information, and now you have 1,000 districts and 100 community college districts, I think this is speaking to some of the complexity. So I don't think it's entirely management by any means. I think that is playing a small part of it, in that the state could just run a little bit more efficiently within each of these departments, and could be a little bit more proactive on the governance end of actually saying, this is the agency or set of agencies where we want you to be the warehouse for cross-segmental data, because that is a major challenge in California with all these different entities. But you as a legislature could, in statute, say this is the system that we want, and just sort of make it happen rather than it being sort of organically figured out over a number of years.
Madam Chair, it just struck me, because I just returned from observing Montgomery County.
Montgomery County in Maryland.
I knew I was someplace yesterday.
Time zone change. Welcome back.
I know. It's and that's of course, a much smaller system, and it's a county system in Maryland, and a state system that is different from ours. But there's some lessons to learn, I think, in terms of not only organizational management, but also in purpose, in goal setting. And it was striking that, and I see Sarah in the audience, that she joined me. It was striking that the Montgomery County, and I'm sure other states, counties, whatever, set goals for their students, and then they backfill how to achieve that goal. And it was striking that the goal for Montgomery County was 80% of their students were going to be college ready by the time they graduated from high school. And it's a 10-year plan. And so they are at about 70%, 70+% right now. But every kid in 2009, the average SAT scores for every kid in Montgomery County was 1650. Every kid. Every third grader reads at third grade level. Every kid. So you kind of back down. You say, well, how do they do this? What kinds of monies are being spent, et cetera, and what kinds of resources do they have? Well, I think all those things. California has all those things. We spend a lot of money. We spend a lot of money here. But I think it's worthwhile to sit down and figure out what is it that we're trying to do, because we have so many people in the pie that it's really hard to articulate exactly where we're going. So I'll just give you that little inspiration, aha moment in my trip.
I appreciate that, Senator Liu. Senator Hancock.
Yeah, I do have a question, but just to comment on Senator Liu's last comment. I was supposed to go up and look at some of the career technical education, as was Senator Huff. For a variety of reasons, we couldn't in Seattle, Washington, a few weeks ago. However, my staff did go, Rebecca Bauman, and came back and was talking about exactly that. They set goals, they do this, they do that. Why? Why is it easier for them? And on reflection, she said it is perhaps simply that they're a smaller state, that this state is so huge, and that when we do get into setting goals and it gets out into the many layers of sign-off that you have to have, it seems to be a challenge for us. But I do believe that we've got to get a handle on our IT systems in California, that everything, and this isn't an analogy, but from schools to prisons, we cannot track what's happening to people. We cannot manage our systems well. And if it would be a huge upfront cost at a time when the state has very little money, if we could do it, it would completely change it for the better, our ability to achieve the goals that we set. But I did have a question for you. On your list is ensuring capacity to implement reforms, in which we lost a number of points. We lost 7 points on that. What does that mean?
It factors in several different considerations, one of them being how have we spent some of the other federal monies that we've received to facilitate reform and create conditions for reform. Now, obviously, the details are what matter. What does it mean to create conditions for reform? And I think essentially what they wanted to see is, in a case like something for data systems, that we at least had the infrastructure in place to go forward and begin to make improvements. I don't know that data was a spot that we lost points there specifically, but it would be basically saying, given the long-term goals that we've set in this application, is it reasonable given what the state has now and the way it's devoting its resources to those problems currently and going forward?
Thank you. And then in supporting STEM subjects, and I just carried a bill on this so that we can begin to define and focus on science, technology, engineering, and math courses. There was a total of 15 points available, and we got none. Now, why was that?
Well, it was honestly a little surprising that the state didn't get any. There were certainly components of the application that seemed to focus on STEM. But I think the general answer here would be, unlike some of the other criteria that you're looking at here, this was meant to be more of a pervasive theme throughout the application. Is there some sort of consistent theme relating to STEM throughout the Race to the Top submission? And I mean, based on what the judges said, they seem to have thought that we didn't. Now, I mean, again, whether or not the individual components that we had add up to the, to the total, it's hard to say why that didn't materialize.
Senator Huff?
Follow up on the data again. So we're setting into place data collection slower than we would like, but it's being set up, and we're changed some law to help specifically to qualify for Race to the Top. But the two states that scored well also use that data to inform school personnel decisions. Do we need policy change here to be more competitive in that area?
So getting at this question and some of the other comments and questions over the last few minutes, California right now, it has something like 6 or 7 professional development programs, state-funded categorical programs. Now, it's a little awkward right now because virtually all of them are flexible, and state's not really sure whether they're used for professional development. Nonetheless, thinking back for when these programs were created, I can't think of a single one that had a focus of using data to improve student achievement and then somehow connect it to professional development. None of them had that focus. You could imagine that there would have just been one professional development with that as the focus. And some states, I think, are when I say the word strategic, that's sort of the kind of thing that I mean, is rather than being a little bit more ad hoc about saying, well, this program will do math professional development, and you do 40 hours and we'll call it done. They say, well, we'll look at how well your students are doing, we'll look at what standards you're not teaching well, and then we'll send you to training so that next year we're going to look at the same data and see if you've gotten better. We just, although some districts in California use this approach and have found it very useful in improving schools, it's not pronounced as the state and structured at the state level to do that. The same kinds of things with evaluations. So in some areas, principals are being held accountable. Their schools aren't meeting academic accountability standards and they're being let go or shifted to other schools. But that's not, again, really pervasive for teachers to get them on a certain career path, to promote them, to pay them more, to give them professional development at the very least. So I think in both of those areas, there were sort of classic examples of how California hasn't been particularly strategic in using data to foster improvement.
Okay, thank you.
And it's a very good segue into the final page of our handout, which raises some questions about what Phase 2 would look like. And part of the reason it's a good segue is you've already touched on the degree to which data is used at the state level and as part of a state-level system versus what is being done by a local education agency on the data front. And so now with districts potentially driving the reform process and the Race to the Top application, it's going to be important to figure out, in a case like data, how much we're going to be evaluated based on the local data efforts, how much will still be weighed in terms of our state-level data efforts, and whether or not the local efforts and the state efforts are synchronized in terms of where we want to be going with the reform efforts. So just to mention a few of the questions that we raise here on the final page of the application, one of the basic questions that we have would be, what was the reason for delaying in terms of deciding to mount a Phase 2 application? And what's the primary rationale for submitting a Phase 2 application? Just getting back to some of these broader issues of, are we talking about an application that's designed to drive state-level reforms, or is it more of a local district reform effort where some of the state-level efforts will factor in? Additionally, as we've been talking about figuring out exactly what the plan is for improving the application, by virtue of having districts leading the way, is that going to increase our competitiveness, and in what ways? Again, how exactly is participation going to be weighed? Is it looking at districts as percentage of a statewide total versus just percent of districts in the consortium that is joined together? And then, given that the districts seem to be the driving the bottom-up approach, sort of what would the state's role be? As you mentioned, it doesn't seem like there would necessarily need to be legislation involved, but would there be oversight? Obviously, you're providing that here, but what exactly is the state's role going forward, especially given how fast all of this is unfolding? I've already mentioned alignment of goals. Just are the district's goals in all of these areas, not just data, aligned with what the state wants to accomplish for its reform efforts? And then again, just to touch on the likelihood of success, even if the strategy is a viable one, which it very well may be, what is the likelihood that we'll be able to jump from our relatively low ranking last time to a high enough position to receive funding? So those are just a few fundamental questions going forward.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that testimony, and I would really urge individuals to concentrate on page 5. It is very detailed in terms of the various areas in which we are scored. I think many of these, as Senator Huff, you indicated, they do carry over to some very challenging policy discussions that we've had in this Education Committee, and that, quite frankly, are just not going to go away. Whether or not we are funded in a Round 2 application. With respect to the delay in initiating a Phase 2, I mean, to a large extent, I know that there were many of us who indicated right away, whatever the outcome would be in terms of funding for Phase 1, that Phase 2 was always there. And so I think that's important. My hope this time, and I'm interested to hear from the next panel in terms of the plan to start with the Magnificent Six, see what we can do to open up and move forward. As I look at page 5, I still see that number 1, the participation, the standing up and say, part of a coalition of the willing to say, I step forward to help my students race to the top. That is still the biggest block of points, and I think in terms of the magnitude, the greatest magnitude, which just stands out in terms of where we lost our way once again in California. So that's a question that we'll direct to the second panel, but thank you so very much, and let's go ahead and bring the panelists for Phase 2. Actually, panel 2. I'm now talking race to the top language now. Panel 2. Okay, where are we going for Round 2? And we have with us, we're very honored to have with us the Secretary of Education, Ms. Bonnie Reese. We had hoped to get Jack O'Connell, Superintendent of Public Instruction. Representing him today is Deputy Lupita Cortez Alcala. Thank you for being here. And with us as well, too, one of the Magnificent Six, Mr. Michael Hansen, Superintendent of the Fresno Unified School District. So we thank you very much for participating. I would suggest we start with the Secretary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to talk about both our decision to go ahead with Round 2 and our approach to Round 2. I guess it was 2 days after I got sworn in as Secretary of Education, the finalists got announced for Round 1, and we saw we were 27th on the list. A number of things happened simultaneously. My undersecretary showed me an article that came out about how the Gates Foundation had spent millions of dollars for consultants that worked with over 30 states in Round 1, including 14 of the 16 finalists. So that was one thing that happened right away. And so one of the things we realized to do is let's go to Gates, have them connect us to the consultants that worked with all these states so we can get the benefit of professional expertise. Because as you heard from the LAO, analyzing and seeing the numbers is a complicated process. So why not go to the consultants that worked with over 30 states, had success by working with almost all the finalists, including the ones that ultimately won, and get the benefit of their input. So we began that process. Parthenon Group, Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey, those were three of the biggest consultants that did work with these 30 states, including the finalists and the two winners. We had hours and hours of discussions with them, and the other thing that happened simultaneously was that through the governor's D.C. office, working with the NGA, I think about 12 to 16, I forget the number of governors, signed a letter that went immediately to Secretary Arne Duncan saying, please, because we were told in the call after they announced the finalists that it might be weeks until they give the scoring and the comments. So everyone, California wasn't the only state, we were all saying, how do we know how to inform how we do round two until we see the scoring and the comments? We said it, so the letter encouraged that being released earlier, and it encouraged the deadline from June 1 to be extended a little later. The deadline wasn't extended. The results got announced maybe 5 days earlier than they originally said. So at that point, we again engaged with the consultants that as quickly as they could did a very careful review of all the states. We actually had two calls, one immediately and then one like 5 days later when they actually had a chance to do more reading and reviewing of both California's application, the points and the comments, and all the finalists' points and comments. And in those discussions, we started looking at, because we did come in 27th, kind of the futility of taking this, the statewide. We thought, well, if we don't have statewide buy-in from the LEAs, if we don't have an up-and-running statewide data system, if we don't have statewide teacher union support for this, do we have a chance? And if there's absolutely no chance, then do we want to spend the time and effort? And it was about that point that Arne Duncan actually called me and called the governor. And in both those calls, I mean, I don't know if any of you have had a chance to meet and chat with Arne. He's a good guy and a straight-talking guy. So I was saying all these things to him, and he kept referring us to look at the Georgia application. And you could see from the chart in the LAO that they came in with way lower than us in terms of LEA participation, statewide union buy-in, and all of that. So the governor calls me up and he says, I just got off the phone with Arne Duncan, and he said, look at Georgia, we should try for that approach where it's bottom up, it's districts that are leading and fully committed. What's the downside of that? So I said, well, the downside might be that we've got a short period of time and these superintendents are busy running their districts and their plates are full, and do they want to actually give up their time to actually put it in when it's such a long shot? So he said, call the superintendents. They're our partners. Run it by them. So I actually called, it started with three that we were chatting with, Ray Cortines, Mike Hansen, and Chris Steinhauser of Long Beach. And of course, we were connected to them for the following reason. Ray Cortines, as you all know, was all upset in round one. He thought LAUSD was so large they should do their own race for the top application. And I had been in discussions, and the governor was meeting with Mike Hansen and Chris Steinhauser, because in looking at, in pursuing the legislation from Race to the Top round one that you all passed, and the commission and the Common Core, we were also simultaneously involved in looking at the English language arts and math second draft that came out for the Common Core standards. And in looking at that, they said, call Chris Steinhauser. He was very involved in national math standards, California's high state standards. In chatting with him, he was telling me about the collaborative he did with Mike and Fresno, and in fact how in the last couple of years, even with budget difficulties, they were able to redirect. They did kind of the Singapore math under our high math standards. They did a lot of teacher development. They have brought a coach to every school. They had a dashboard of accountability for their school principal. And lo and behold, with all that fabulous leadership and the support they did and the accountability, the students started having unbelievable success and achievement in math. So that's how some of this got started. So we were realizing that obviously in a state as large as California, we were chatting with these consultants, that it's different for a large state. And for a large state like California, both our size and our governance structure, that really education is delivered at the local level. As crazy as our governance structure is, we have locally elected school boards, we have superintendents, and so you say that's where the delivery is happening. So if we have superintendents that are actually committed both to the goals and reforms of Race to the Top, already doing well with their local stakeholders and student achievement and turning around failing schools, it seemed that with the input from our consultants, that even though it's a long shot, the only shot we might have, as Secretary Duncan told us, is to kind of take the approach of Georgia, which is to have superintendents be the ones to put together the plan, because then, not if, when we get invited back to D.C. as finalists to make the presentation, what's more convincing, not having a SPI office or a secretary's office, but having superintendents that are actually the deliverers of education go and support the plan and say, this is what we're committed to doing. And we heard actually from the consultants that in round one, the finalists, that's what the questions were all about. Being convinced that what they put in the plan, they actually, that they're going to make that happen. So all those things came together, and the other factor that was necessary is even with the superintendents being willing to step up, and they really were committed, and they immediately, Hanson, Steinhauser, and Cortinas also said that, let's expand it. There were 3 other superintendents we know. That way we represent both urban school districts and some suburban rural school districts. And all these superintendents are committed. So, could we have gotten 10 superintendents? A magnificent 10, yes. Short time frame, though. These 6 were committed. They stepped up immediately for the working group. The other factor that had to come together is we knew we would need to hire one of these consulting firms that had the expertise from round one because of the short time frame. So even though they were willing to kind of give us a break from what the incredibly high fees they got from Gates in the first round was, we still knew that, we needed foundations to step up, and we had, if that could happen in a day, then that'll be a factor in deciding whether to go ahead or not. And sure enough, the foundation stepped up immediately. Broad Foundation, Stewart Foundation, Irvine Foundation, Packard Foundation, and they came up with the funding both for the consultants and for the executive grant writing team to work with us. So kind of that's the process of how it all came together. So now the approach is, and we've created that these superintendents of the working group, the minute this came together with the superintendent, as this was all going on, Jack O'Connell and Gavin, Lupita came to the working group after the initial discussions that I was having with Jack and Gavin about this approach with the consultants. When the decision was made, okay, we're going ahead and do this, the working group came together for a lengthy session with the consultants, with the writers. They broke down the sections of Race to the Top. Each superintendent stepped forward to kind of be the lead in each of the sections, but not in silos. So they'd be the lead. So let's say one superintendent's the lead on a data section. All the other 5 superintendents connected that superintendent to their district's data person, with a Parthenon consultant assigned to work with the team, with the writers. So it's really been an intense process, an inspiring process, Senators. The other thing we did was immediately after this happened is we set up a series of conference calls, one with all the LEAs, so that immediately all the school districts were informed of the process. They were told that, again, we wished we had more time, but they understood the short time frame we have. So we told them a few things. One, many of you already know and are friendly with, because there's a lot of collaboration going on among our school superintendents. If you really want to get involved, call one of the superintendents to give your input. 2, some of them said that, some superintendents feel that they have the kind of relationship that they could sign the MOU without a vote of their school board. Some felt they may want to get a vote of their school board. So we gave them an estimated date of when we feel the MOU is going to go out, so that in advance they could schedule on public notice a meeting of their board to see if they could get the support for signing on to the MOU for Race to the Top. We also did a conference call with all our congressional delegates in Washington, D.C. and their staff to inform them, George Miller's staff, et cetera. And with staff here, your staff and legislative staff from Sacramento. We told the LEAs on the phone, again in the interest of time, because we have the benefit of round one, go to Race to the Top website, read George's application, read the top 10 applications. You'll start to get a sense, because that's what the consultants are doing with our working group, of what elements in detail were contained in the plan. So in terms of making up the points, on a couple of things I just want to raise. One, the data issue. Some of the questions you asked of the LAO panel in advance were, the consultants told us that one of the key factors in the Obama administration in seeking data was using data to improve student achievement. That's done on the local level. The statewide data in a state the size of California is not, the main priority for that is not to improve student achievement. Almost every, I would say maybe 90% or more of our school districts have robust data systems. So they already, even though there are real questions about CalPads, at the local district level, they have robust data. So that's another strength we have with taking this approach, the bottom-up, local delivery, supporting the superintendent's approach, in that they do have data systems, and that's going to be a very detailed section of the application about how these superintendents are proposing. Some are already doing it, like I told you what's happening with the math results in Fresno and Long Beach, and they're, a detailed proposal on how these districts are putting together a plan to use data to improve student achievement and turn around failing schools. So that's something else that's happening at the local level. The other thing that's relevant at the local level is that every one of these superintendents, we have a statewide teachers union, but locally, that's where collective bargaining is done. So every one of our school districts and local superintendents do their own local bargaining with their own local unions and with their own dynamics with their own school boards. So every one of these superintendents early on started chatting with their local unions, and some of them are hopeful and confident they'll actually get the local union to sign on to the application. But all of them are confident that they're working with their local union. The way the application is being written is that they're actually confident that this is something that they will be able to implement in their local district should they be successful. And frankly, and if they're not successful in getting the grant for Race to the Top, because they still know it's a long shot, they're all confident that this is a path they're committed to pursuing anyhow. So for example, when the Obama administration talks about evaluating teachers and tying those evaluations to student growth. Very often, I know we all hear from the CTA and that well, it's not fair to tie it to one standardized test. But that's not what the Race to the Top round one gave points for. It's multiple measures of student growth. And all our superintendents are committed. They also don't think it's fair to do it on one standardized test, but they do think that there are ways to do multiple measures of student growth that are fair and do reflect an honest view of how our students are doing. Secondly, it's not the 100% or necessarily even 50% of the teacher evaluation. There are a lot of other elements that will be contained in that. And we're creating a timeline that is going to give our superintendents and all our LEAs that sign on to this an opportunity to, over a year's time or such, we're getting there on the MOU, so it's a work in progress now, on developing this again with their boards, with their local stakeholders. And on the other issue, which is also relevant, which you're also hearing, is in terms of me demystifying what our superintendents are saying about the controversy, is that, quote, merit pay. None of them are talking about merit pay. They're all talking about how to use these multiple measures of student growth and other measures of teacher evaluation in a way that can create alternative compensation at a site level. They believe in team approach to this. And it's not just compensation. We're talking about if a school wants to use some of the money for iPads and for other interesting and exciting education things that they feel can help their students with achievement, that's what they're talking about building in. So it's really very exciting and inspiring to be in all these working group meetings and see the ideas they're coming up with. On the turning around failing schools, I mean, there are issues, and this is where coming up with a fair method of teacher evaluation, which, by the way, as you know, has been done in other states and other cities. Denver did it with their teachers union agreement in terms of they worked over 8 years to figure it out, but they got it and it's up and running now. So, on all of that, the turning around failing schools, so we would look with the consultants and they said, well, here are the components in certain states that scored highest on that. They committed to the following. That in failing schools, if a teacher was rated through this system as ineffective, in California I think we call it unsatisfactory. That if after 1 year of an unsatisfactory rating in a failing school, we said to the districts, because this is what some other states did, we will, more than 1 year of unsatisfactory, that teacher will be removed from a low-performing school. So we said so the working group discussed this. This is just an example of what's inspiring when we deal with good district leaders. They said, are you prepared to commit to that? Well, yes, but then we need to look at the teacher pipeline. So this was exciting, and this is where the race to the top in our state is also working, again, bottom up, is having Cal State, UC, community college in there. So they're talking about how does our school superintendents connect more to Cal State and our school districts so that they can be involved in, and this is in the budget for Race to the Top, which is being formed. So right now, as we're working out these plans, part of what will happen is, as these reforms and exciting plans are being put forth, dollar values from the Race to the Top $700 million are being put together to see how much money might we need in that budget to do that. So, would the LEAs, if they had a $50 million in grant money to go and work with Cal State and say, we want to take one of our teacher coaches that are successful in a low-performing school and actually go into your classroom and encourage so that when a teacher graduates Cal State, they're ready to hit the ground, incentivized to go into a low-performing school and hit the ground running and know what it takes to be successful. So those are just some of the highlights. So, I guess I'll stop here because I could go on forever, because this is really exciting process in terms of how we came to deciding to move forward, the approach we're taking, and some of the elements that are being discussed that will be put forth in this plan.
Okay, Secretary Reese, let me thank you. We just feel the enthusiasm, and 2 days on the job, there's the call, but I know in the many conversations I've had with you over time, you've always been very optimistic, that indomitable spirit that we're California, and oh, yes, we can. So thank you so very much for those substantive highlights. Okay, Lupita, welcome, and thank you for representing Superintendent O'Connell.
Why, thank you. Again, Lupita Cortez Alcala on behalf of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Jack O'Connell, Honorable Chair and members. I'll be brief because Secretary Reese did such a great job of giving you quite an overview, and I'd like you to hear from our Superintendent, Mike Hansen. But of course, Superintendent O'Connell wanted to be here, and because of scheduling conflicts was unable to, but he definitely wanted me to let you know how honored he is to be a part of this Race to the Top Team 2. He was very honored to be a part of the first one. He's very committed, as you know. His last 7 years, he's been focused on closing the achievement gap, and to that end had created the P16 councils and brokers of expertise and those recommendations. And so, when the call came in, of course he was going to be, there's no question, he's completely and totally committed, and has a CD team member on each of the assurance areas. So we're very honored to be a part of it. This is an unprecedented effort, going bottom up versus top down. These are the superintendents that, after all, know how it actually works on the ground. And so we really look forward. And there's been a lot of aha moments, as Secretary Reese has said, even in terms of connecting the higher ed folks with these 6 districts. And so it's been really neat to be a part of, and a learning experience, of course. Also, I just wanted to, of course, we were disappointed about the first Race to the Top. We gave it 110%. But we think that there are sections of the actual application that we could do better on, in terms of writing it, making sure that all the detail from maybe what was in the appendix is now in full involved, but also our new strategy to include the 6 districts, and then making sure that we can scale it statewide. And so that's going to be the challenge, and that's where we're going to need to focus our work. And I just wanted to sort of echo that these 6 districts and giving the district perspective is a great way to go, just because they not only know how it's going to work on the ground, but can actually give us detailed information on the parts in which we kind of could have done better, in terms of what innovative schools that exist. For example, we also saw points in that area with regards to charter schools and other non-charter schools that are innovative. Well, the 6 districts and others would have that information, and so there are parts that we can definitely improve on the application. So I think this is definitely the way to go. Let's see. I know there was a lot of questions on CalPADS and data, and so we do have an information hearing happening today at 1:30 in the Assembly Education Committee, but Carrick Ashley is here to help answer any questions on data if anyone has those questions. But with that, I just want to say that we're very happy to be part of that team, very excited about this effort. Of course, we're excited to be a part of round 3 if we needed to be part of round 3, but we're hoping we're going to be successful in this round. So without further ado, I wanted to turn it over to Mike Hansen. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so very much. And let let me just mention once again the 6 districts. They are, of course, LA Unified, Long Beach, Fresno, Clovis, San Francisco, and I'm blanking on
Sanger.
Sanger Unified.
Sanger. How big is
Okay,
that?
Sanger.
Sanger.
About 10,000.
About how many?
About 10,000 students.
10,000?
But you've got from the biggest in California to small. It's
From the north
rural,
to
it's
south.
urban. I think it's a really reflective population. And so let me thank you, Superintendent Hansen. We were very honored when we knew that you were going to be in town. We know you're busy. You have to get away to keep writing on that round 2, so we won't detain you much. But I can't tell you how much we admire the collaboration that you've entered into with Long Beach. We've heard much about just the commitment. You know, Senator Liu, when you talked about if there's a will, there's a way, and you've certainly demonstrated that in the collaboration between Fresno and Long Beach. It's very exciting. So thank you for being here today, and we're interested in when you got that phone call, how did you respond, what are your thoughts, and how do we move forward?
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Romero, and good morning, members of the committee. I'm Mike Hansen, Superintendent of Fresno Unified, and I'm very happy to be here to provide my testimony around the process we're currently engaged in and answer any questions that you may have. The Fresno Unified, as you may know, is the 4th largest district in the state of California, serving more than 73,000 students currently. And I've been here before talking about the need for us to continue to push on improvements. And I'd like to make a distinction at the outset here, because it's frequently when we talk about reform, we get dragged into things that are process-driven. And what I think any of my colleague superintendents would say to you is reform is a process, but it's a means to an end, and we need to keep focusing on the outcome of improving student achievement. So it's very easy for folks, especially when there's money attached, to start talking reform and then fund process instead of keeping their eye on the ball around improving student achievement for all of our kids. And I do think that California is unique and will be able to produce a very compelling application simply because it is our view that California is facing some significant challenges that are unique from the rest of the country in our state's composition and the makeup of our students and the challenges they present. And frequently, if we're not careful and we don't make the moves we need to in California and produce for California students, I can almost guarantee you from my perspective that we will fail the students of America, because California's current students are the students of the future America, and we need to keep that in mind because that will continue to reflect as our states continue to grow and our populations move. So I would first like to tell you about the call that I received. I guess I'll start there.
3 a.m.?
Yeah, it was a call. Secretary Reese and Chris Steinhauser and I were in Washington, D.C. at the Council of Great City Schools with Secretary Duncan and others, and we had this request to be in a Monday meeting in Southern California with the governor. Okay, I guess we'll change our travel plans. And we got back and actually spent a couple of hours that was very refreshing. The governor was deeply interested and continued to push for greater clarity, and you could tell that his desire to help improve the options for kids in our state is completely unique and very straightforward. And I'd also just like to say, with respect to Superintendent O'Connell, he in fact was the person who announced and initially endorsed the Long Beach and Fresno partnership, and has been through the department staff and Jack himself has been completely supportive of our work. And so if Chris were here, he would say to you, we really we're not trying to corner the market on how to do this work. In fact, we've been breathing a sigh of relief that more districts are coming and we can begin to share the mistakes that we've made about how we get districts to collaborate, and I think that's being borne out in the process. So I would like to give a nod to the legislature first off to give you a sense of how this is moving forward in the bold actions that were taken around Race to the Top 1 and changes in law. For example, I'll just call out around the 5% lowest performing schools, persistently underperforming schools. That has had an immediate impact in the state. I mean, a lot of districts are now grappling with very real challenges of how do we take schools that we're now required to by law to do something different with to open the 10-11 school year. and that is going up and down the state. As Secretary Reese mentioned, we, the superintendents, have been working with our labor groups, in particular our teachers' associations, around how we best do that. And I'm pleased to say in Fresno that we've made some great progress. We have, out of our 106 schools, we have 3 that actually showed up on the list, and I'll be making a recommendation to the board in the next couple of weeks about what to do with them. But it has been in full and complete partnership with our Teachers Association. And I think that level of collaboration that's continuing to build is even seen at the local level with our current FTA leadership being returned to their positions for another 2-year term with over 70% of the vote, basically saying, that collaboration is a way to go, and it doesn't necessarily have to be confrontational as we move forward. There are recognitions by all that we have to do things differently. It is surprising, I think, as we get into this work, how many districts are realizing that we either have the capacity or the capability to do some of this work already, or we're very close, or someone else we're now talking to has already figured out how to do some of this work around teacher evaluation or underperforming schools and so on. So while our application fell short the first time, I think there were a number of things that were put in place that will continue to be a springboard for round 2 and frankly beyond. I would want to say, as we name the districts, I think it's important so that I'm not the only name and face attached with this. I want to make sure that we name those superintendents so they're on the hook with me. Ray Cortines in L.A. and Carlos Garcia in San Francisco, Chris Steinhauser we've mentioned in Long Beach, Dr. Dave Cash in Clovis, and Mark Johnson in Sanger. And if I'll just do a quick description of Clovis and Sanger, as they're not as easily identified given their size. Clovis is a suburban district of about 37,000 kids in Fresno County that has had a long history of doing some phenomenal things with students inside and outside the classroom. And Dave and his district's leadership, I think, will be a huge welcome addition. And then very quietly in a rural district in southern Fresno County, Mark Johnson and the Sanger Unified team, their board, their teachers, have been working with some of the most challenged populations in our state and have just been making phenomenal growth across the board. And they proved that it can be done in a smaller district, a medium-sized district, a rural district, with all of the students that we're all challenged with. So I applaud them for stepping forward as well. So I think something else that Secretary Reese didn't mention, it's important for us to realize when we talk about the bottom-up approach, we're talking well over 900,000 students, which is bigger than most of the states that are in the competition. And it is important. Probably one of the failings of round 1 was trying to write it from a statewide perspective with so much diversity, small, medium, and large districts, with all the ins and outs that go with local identity. It was almost by definition impossible to write a statewide application from a statewide perspective that got specific enough to earn points in the application process. So we found in the second round that there are a lot of great things that have already been put in place in California that we frankly didn't get credit for because we weren't speaking to it as directly as we should have. And I think the bottom-up approach of having the district superintendents, and I'd be the first to tell you, it is really our senior staffs and the folks in charge of great teachers and great leaders and data systems and those areas that are called out and raised to the top that are so important, because they're doing this work and can articulate very clearly at a granular level that makes sense what we're doing or what we can do differently immediately to be competitive. And I think that's we're already seeing while we're in the throes of the application development, our districts are already learning a tremendous amount from each other that, frankly, if we just went through the superintendent to superintendent portal, we'd never get it. So I will tell you that all of us on some level are trying to put down a senior staff mutiny. We are running our staffs incredibly hard to get to this place, and most of us have folks going 24 hours a day on different shifts to get things pulled together. It's not things that have to be necessarily created, but they have to be pulled together and synthesized. Because we're finding a lot of great stuff that already exists in these districts. The only one that's probably not 24/7 is Sanger, just because they have so few people, and Mark and Rich and some others do need to sleep a few hours a day. So I would just like to close my initial comments by thanking the subcommittee and thanking Secretary Reese and our governor and State Superintendent O'Connell for their endorsement so far in pushing us into this new way of doing business. I think it will provide great opportunity for other districts to learn from. I have 2 phone calls scheduled on the way home back to a board meeting this afternoon with superintendents who want to know more about how they get in and what's forming and how will this look. I have no doubt that the other superintendents are fielding calls from superintendents around the state as well. So I think our students, I will just close by using the 5% lowest performing schools. The action already taken in this building around Race to the Top 1 are already producing results for kids in the upcoming school year. And we should not lose sight of that fact. As we move forward with round 2, we expect that to continue with a greater opportunity for more districts to see and identify and download good practices into their district. Our students, by extension, our districts and our communities and ultimately our state are already improving based on what goes on here. And that's something, frankly, a lot of superintendents wouldn't be able to say year in and year out. But I think in this year of Race to the Top and really being pushed on what we're either going to play or not play. And I don't think there's a leader in the state working in the field of education who does not want to play and improve student learning. So we continue to thank you for your support, and I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
And Senator Romero, if I may, there were 2 points I forgot to mention that I think are relevant because STEM came up. And we got 0 to 15. That was an all or nothing. You either get 15 or you get 0. And about a month or so ago, I was speaking at Caltech at a STEM summit. And as you know, a number of the leading foundations in California are particularly focused on that. And they've jumped in a working group with the superintendents to take over that section so that it goes through not just in the STEM section, but it's weaved throughout all the sections of our application, believing that California absolutely should be able to get 15 out of the 15 on that. And the other point I wanted to bring up is that the I-3 grants, another big reason that these superintendents wanted to step forward with Race to the Top is even if they felt it was a long shot to get granted for this, hundreds of I-3 applications are going in or have gone in. I think the deadline's this week, and every one of these superintendents have I-3 applications going into the federal government. So they are feeling that this application will be a highlight of some of the great things they're doing and will enhance their ability to even be awarded the I-3 grant. And the last point is on the building on the success of the legislation that was passed last year on Race to the Top that you heard so eloquently spoken about how it's already making a difference in the field. We believe that we're going to present that very strongly in this round 2 application and build upon how the Race to the Top process not just helped California pass this important legislation, but how it's already starting to work in the field.
I just want to say, especially thank you all for just brilliant testimony, but Superintendent Hansen in particular, there was some very heavy lifting in this committee, in this legislature, the superintendent supported it. The governor absolutely was there. That time, Secretary Thomas, and we very much appreciate the work that he's done. But it is so reassuring when we hear you testify and to say that it is making a difference. And I say that because I know that when I first approached Race to the Top, as did Senator Steinberg as well, in staunchly supporting the reforms we wanted, we always articulated this is about a vision of reform that puts students first. Yes, we want that money, but this is about having, the ganas, as we say, the desire that it's about changing outcomes for students in California. And so I want to thank you so very much for sitting here today and testifying that it is making a difference. And we haven't received $1 yet, emphasis on yet, but it is making a difference. So thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Let me just ask one question on this. Overall, so the 6 are leading, others are calling, the whole dialogue that's taking place, the collaboration, the working with each other, which is so important in this process. How do they join in officially? Sort of what's the process there?
Well, first, as you heard here, some of the superintendents are already contacting other superintendents that say we know what we've read the application, we know what the commitment is, we see the approach you're taking, we're ready to sign on. When are we going to see the MOU? So they're being kept up to speed. Secondly, we have a website where information is being posted, and finally,
What's the name of the website?
It's www.caracetothetop.org, or you can send it to info@caracetothetop.org, and that's the way you can do it electronically.
And finally, the MOU is going to go out next week to all the LEAs.
And we should also just mention, we also have some other districts already starting to participate a bit in the conference calls. That there are literally every single day in these different assurance areas working groups of all the districts, 2 to 3 hours a day in these conference calls, and then they close down the conference call and they work for another 14, 15 hours, and they get back on another conference call to check updates. So we have folks in our steering committee working groups starting to call in superintendents saying, I want to know more about this because I'm all in as well, and I want to know, I don't want to wait for the MOU, and they're welcome to call in as well.
And as Superintendent Hansen said, at a minimum, we have a commitment from a number from superintendents that are committed to signing this that represent over 1 million students, which is why our strategy is interesting, because 1 million students, even though that's a small percentage of the total state, and we anticipate getting more LEAs to sign on, is larger than the entire state population, student population in most states.
It is. It's incredible.
Okay, questions from the committee?
No,
Senator Hancock.
Yeah. Thank you all. This has been a very exciting presentation. One of the things that jumps out at me is the importance of the bottoms-up approach and this kind of miracles that can happen when a small group of practitioners, and I would underscore that, get together to share experiences and figure out how they can move forward. And I'm wondering how we build that in to other approaches to education because of the kind of lack of that connection, I think, in round one. And so I hope that we're looking for ways to do that. And one of you mentioned that at Denver, they worked with their teachers' unions to adopt an evaluation system. Mm-hmm. Now, that's the kind of thing were we to do in California, because the stunning thing, honestly, in the first round was the disconnect that was there. And I wondered if you had any thoughts for us, Superintendent Hansen, on how one builds that collaborative relationship with teachers' unions.
So thank you. I would answer it a couple of different ways. I would not want to lead the committee to believe that bottom up is always the best way, because there has to be a mix between top down, bottom up for it to work. So it's got to be approached from a situational standpoint, and this is a perfect situation now that we've tried to do top down and we're in round two and we need greater clarity around what we're trying to do. Bottom up is perfectly appropriate here, and it makes a great deal of sense and moves you much faster. But if we always wait for things to be grassroots, we will not improve student outcomes. I would point to our state, and people lose track of this, with our state testing and accountability system. It is one of the longest in terms of being implemented. It tests more kids in more grade levels, in more subject areas than anybody else does in America. And that would have never come about if we did the bottom-up kind of approach. This was a standards movement that had to be driven from on high, and so that was appropriate as well. So I just want to make that distinction. But with respect to teacher unions, I think that the easiest way to have the conversation around teacher evaluation is, as Secretary Reese mentioned, if someone moves forward and says the California standards test, a single measure for a third grade teacher or a 10th grade geometry teacher, is going to be how kids last year did and how they did this year, and I get one data point and that's how you're going to define me, I don't think there's a professional in education that would say that's fair, or that we like it, or that we agree with it. So the multiple measures piece is really important, right? And it's important to distinguish that the California standards tests were designed and should be used for. They're important for us in school districts and school sites with academic performance indexes and whatnot. But that's really an accountability measure to help guide state policymakers about what's working and what's not. But at the ground level, a teacher would say that's important data for me to have, but what's really important are the interim assessments that are given 2, 3, 4, 5 times a year, depending on your district school site, for example, or what I'm doing with my grade level team week to week, month to month, so that we measure a student's progress. And I think most teachers would say to you, if that's the kind of stuff you want to talk to me about, I'm all for that. So I think it's in the approach. I think when you start to talk about multiple measures, it really softens the conversation because it makes it more real and more appropriate for our teachers. And then the other piece is I would continue to say to folks, talk about student performance and teacher performance in the context of the California standards for the teaching profession. Right? They are standard across the state. And when we talk about student achievement, we are really talking about CSTP5, which is assessing student learning. It is a standard of practice for teachers in this state, and frankly, they call it something different in other states, but it's a standard of practice for teachers anywhere, right? How are our students doing? So I think when you come at it through the CSTPs, which is it's a much more known language, and when you come at it through the lens of multiple measures of student achievement, it becomes tactile and real for teachers, a place that they can engage.
Senator Hancock.
That's very helpful. In the description that you just gave, what I'm hearing is time in the school day for that kind of discussion in a targeted way of how we use data to actually improve students' ability to succeed in certain subject areas. And I remember working with WestEd in some past lives when they were looking at the use of data, and in one of the schools in San Francisco actually got it down to it was like Latino 8th grade boys are not learning this. What do we need to do to improve those scores by making it relevant and accessible to those kids, and then raising scores? And that brings me to the subject of money. How one gets the time in the school day for that collaboration and focus on data, and really using our teachers as education researchers for their own professional growth as well as the growth of their students. And it concerns me that by so many measures we are falling behind in our funding of schools, so that those support services may not be available. And I'm just wondering, did the schools that succeed fund education better, or is it how we're using our resources? Do you have any sense of
I think when you, with respect, when you get into a funding conversation, someone is always going to be able to make the argument, I couldn't do something because of it. And it's logical. But the reality is these 6 superintendents and most superintendents in the state would say to you, we would love more resource. And it's been disastrous cuts to education, but we get what the state and national and global economy has looked like. So we take the position that we're going to fight from where we are rather than from where we'd like to be. And so taking it in that spirit, I think that the school improvement is largely driven by great teachers and great leaders. Right? That at the end of the day, even a data system is important, but even if you didn't have a great data system, great teachers and great principals would be able to figure it out. The problem with not having a great data system is that you then can't aggregate anything to the school level, to the grade level, or to a district level and figure out what's working and identify best practices fast enough. So I think they all have to work hand in hand, but I want to go to your time issue, if I may. There are a couple of things that pop into my head about the time, because you're absolutely right. The time to collaborate is critical for our teachers to be able to work with one another to produce the kind of results that we expect and that we see actually happening in multiple places. I will tell you almost without exception, where you go find a school that's doing great things, they're going to have some system in place where teachers are together. And a leader is with the teacher together talking about student achievement. It can take, literally 100 different forms, but a couple of big ones that come to mind is just about every collective bargaining agreement with the teachers union in the state is going to have something around the instructional day versus the work day, and somewhere nested in there is some conversation around time used for meetings, times that we can pull teachers together. School that's probably lagging almost uniformly will use their time for meetings that are of little import and that aren't at all engaging for professionals. Folks that are moving forward will be using that meeting time outlined in a contract for exactly this kind of work. Teachers working together around student data. So I think the collective bargaining agreement is one place. The second place is, absent the collective bargaining agreement, you will find principals and staff being very creative about how they create time in the daily schedule, either by scheduling all English teachers on a certain grade level to have the same prep together so that they can be working, or any kind of variation of that theme. And then the third place takes us back full circle to data systems. The third way to get time is to have a very high quality, user-friendly, teacher-supported data system in your schools, so that even in the short time a teacher may have between classes or when they're running to do a million other things, they can access the data they're wondering about, and they're better prepared to engage folks in a conversation as colleagues, right? Frequently, absent a good data system, what ends up happening is you have to have staff time to come together to get data that somebody else had to produce for you. If it's actually on the teacher's desktop, a lot of answers could be asked and answered without even having to go to a meeting. So I think those are three different ways that we can get at the time more effectively.
Thank you so very much. All right, fabulous presentation. We look forward to it. Once again, ready, set, go again. We will get there. All right, thank you so very much.
Thank you for your leadership on all these issues, Senator.
Thank you. Okay, public comment. Anybody wishing to comment at this time, please step forward. All right, seeing a rather, they've heard it all. So thank you so very much. Let me thank the members for being here. I think this was a very informative hearing. We look forward to standing with you when this next application is sent off. And let me just thank everybody, and this hearing is now officially concluded. Thank you.